Hey friends, what if the things that we make are also making us? What if every stitched line, scribbled word, or shaped moment isn't just self-expression, but self-formation? Hey friends, welcome to From the Threshold. I am Renee Hill, and each Saturday I come to you from my own front porch, my literal threshold, to offer a quiet moment of reflection for anyone navigating a messy in the middle creative life. It's not a tutorial, it's not a checklist, it's just a pause. And my hope is that it becomes a place where you can reconnect with your own creative story with a little more compassion. Wherever you're listening from, I'm glad you're here. If you are in the US, you may hear apparently my neighbors think that 10 a.m. is the time to start doing fireworks because we celebrated our Independence Day holiday this weekend. And while we were opening up, while the countdown timer was on, I started hearing fireworks, so you may hear that in the background. We are in week 5 of our 6-part series on Limina's core creative values. And so far, we've explored creativity as a birthright, depth over speed, storytelling through making, and exploration without rules. And today we move into one of the deepest truths of all, transformation through creativity. The idea that making has the power to shape both individuals and culture. Let's talk about it. First, creativity shapes us. I felt it in my own life again and again, not always dramatically, not like lightning strikes or big turning points, but in small ways, quiet ways, ways that sneak up on you until one day you realize that you are not the same person that you were when you started stitching that piece, or journaling those thoughts, or painting that painting. Sometimes we think we're making a thing, but really, we are becoming someone. That's not just a poetic idea. Neuroscience studies show that when we engage in creative activities, especially ones that involve movement, so like sewing or sculpture or dance or painting, it activates part of the brain that's involved in self-awareness, emotional regulation, and meaning making. So in other words, making helps us process who we are. And even when there's no finished product, even when the piece stays messy or half done, your brain, your body, your inner world is still moving toward integration. You are literally different than when you started. That's transformation, not as a big event, but as a slow becoming. So if creativity shapes us, what happens when a lot of people are being shaped and making and sharing what they've made? And we call that culture. Not in the big abstract academic sense, but in the real lived in sense. Culture is just what we care about, what we repeat, and what we pass along. It's the stories that we tell, the patterns we follow, the moments that we mark, the clothes we wear, colors we love, the phrases we say without thinking. It's not just art museums or history books. It's also your mom's quilt, your neighbor's playlist, the way your family sets the table, or how we treat people who are sick or different. And here's something I think we forget. Culture is not made by systems. It is made by people. Anthropologists have long said that if you want to understand a culture, you don't just study the buildings or the battles. You study what they made, what they chose to decorate, to preserve, to hold sacred, or worth remembering. And often those things aren't the big achievements. They're small, handmade ones. So when we talk about culture, we're not talking about something that's out there at a distance. We're talking about what happens when we, each of us, start putting our creative choices into the world again and again and again. Culture isn't fixed. It's lived. It's changing all the time. And every act of making is part of how it evolves. So if culture is made by people, then creative people, makers like you and me, are shaping cultures all the time, even if we don't realize it. The things that we make carry stories. They reflect values. They express who we are, what we remember, and what we believe is worth sharing. And over time, those personal expressions add up to something bigger. Think about a protest banner, or a comfort quilt, or a memorial altar, or even a flyer handed out on the street. Those might start as individual creative acts, but they become part of a collective voice. Even quiet personal pieces can do this. Sampler embroidery, for example, wasn't only a teaching tool. It encoded stories and values and sometimes resistance. Indigenous beadwork, textile patterns, folk songs, these are not only hobbies, they are cultural memory. And here's the powerful part. Your work is part of that same tradition. You might not see that. You might think this is just something I'm doing to unwind. But every time you choose to make something, you are shaping the world that others will live in. The colors you choose, the way you spend your time, the symbols you return to, the textures that you favor, all of it says something. And all of it adds something to the shared story that we are writing together. This is more than just theory. Let me show you what I mean. Here are a few makers whose creativity shaped culture, even when they weren't expressly trying to. The first is Harriet Powers. Harriet was born into slavery in Georgia, and after emancipation, she used her needle not just to sew, but to speak. She stitched story quilts, filled with biblical scenes, local legends, and symbolic imagery, at a time when Black women's stories weren't being written down, let alone preserved. Only 2 of her quilts survive today. One is held in the Smithsonian, and the other is at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Her work lives on as part of the fabric of American culture, though I suspect that would surprise her. She stitched memory and meaning into cloth, and in doing so, shaped what was remembered. Decades later, another woman used thread in a different way. Esther Krinitz survived the Holocaust as a girl. When Jews in her village were ordered to report to the train station, she and one sister ran the other way instead. They survived the war, and eventually she and her husband and daughter immigrated to the United States. At some point, she wanted her children to see her Polish heritage the way that she remembered it. So she began to stitch it. And then she just kept going, scene by scene, memory by memory, into embroidered panels. They are beautiful, but they are not soft. They tell the story of her escape, the loss of her family, and the survival of her identity through thread and color and fabric. Her work now travels in exhibitions. It's used in classrooms, museums, and healing spaces. It began as a completely personal act, and it became a cultural reckoning. Neither of these women set out to shape culture, but their work still ripples outward, and that's what creativity can do. It can preserve story, carry memory, offer witness. Their items had a much larger impact than they intended, and I'm not suggesting that your work will end up in a museum. But all making, all of what you do, all of what you create, all of what you allow ripples into forming the culture around you. Here's something that I've been thinking about lately. Why is it that creativity is treated like a luxury until someone wants control? We're told that art is optional, that making is extra, that it's self-indulgent, it's only for people who have, quote, free time. But history tells a different story. When authoritarian regimes rise, artists are often among the first to be silenced. This is historically identifiable, but why is that so? Because creativity holds memory, it carries emotion, it shapes how people see and feel and what they believe is possible. It speaks to us, and that is dangerous to anyone who's trying to control the story. In Nazi Germany, artists were labeled degenerate and were banned or imprisoned. In Stalinist Russia, poets and painters disappeared. In Cambodia, under the Khmer Rouge, an entire generation of artists was almost nearly wiped out. And even now, in Iran, in Russia, and other parts of the world, musicians, filmmakers, weavers, writers are being threatened, arrested, and exiled. Not for violence, not for rebellion, but for witnessing through color, rhythm, symbol, or story. And yes, it's happening in the United States now too. Defunding and restructuring of federal arts agencies, content restrictions and censorship, takeover and reshaping of cultural institutions. And it's because when you shape how people feel, you shape how they can resist. That contradiction matters. If the arts can be dangerous, then they were never frivolous to begin with. So when you sit down to create, even quietly, even for yourself, you are taking part in something powerful, maybe even powerful enough to be feared by those who prefer silence. Here's what all of this comes down to. Culture is not something that we inherit passively. It's something that we make with our choices, our stories, our attention. We are all contributing to the texture of the world around us, with every quilt that tells a story, every journal page that helps someone make sense of their life, every handmade object passed between generations, every conversation sparked by something we made. Those moments matter, because culture doesn't only change through protest or politics. It changes when people begin to live differently, create differently, value differently. When we treat beauty like it matters, when we honor slowness, when we tell true stories, when we choose integrity over ease. That's culture shaping work too. So the question isn't whether your creativity has influence, because it does. The question is, what kind of culture is your creativity helping to build? So what does it look like to live into this? To make not just as self-expression, but as intentional culture building. Here are a few invitations for your week ahead. Name one value that you want your creativity to carry, not as a performance, but as presence. Maybe it's tenderness or honesty or freedom. See what happens when you let that value shape your next creative choice. Make something with memory in it. That's the second one. A color that reminds you of someone, a material you've kept but haven't used, a phrase that won't leave you alone. Let your making hold something personal and see how it connects outward. 3, share a story, even if it's just with one person, about why you made what you made and what it means to you. Not to prove its worth, but to pass along its thread. And 4th, support another artist's voice, especially if it's different from your own. Buy the book, share the poem, lift up the work that tells a different story than yours, because shaping a healthy culture isn't just about being heard yourself. It is also about making space for others to be heard too. And if you'd rather sit with the questions for a while, here are a few you might carry with you this week. What kind of world do I want my making to point toward? What story is my creativity already telling? Where have I treated my creativity as private when it might actually be part of something bigger? And what kind of culture am I helping to shape? Here's what I hope you remember. Your creativity matters, not just for what it produces, but for what it carries, what it preserves, what it resists, what it makes possible. When you choose to make with care, with truth, with intention, you are shaping something that reaches beyond you. And that is not small work. So keep stitching, keep writing, keep showing up with your whole heart. The culture that we live in tomorrow is stitched today by what we make and what we make room for. And one more thing. The culture we shape isn't just made by what we create, but by how we honor the creative work of others, especially when it doesn't look like ours. When we support another artist's voice, when we make room for difference, when we amplify rather than compete, when we reinforce the idea that creativity belongs to everyone. And that is the kind of culture that I want to live in. So if this reflection felt like something that you want more of, you might enjoy the Limina letter, an email I send each Sunday with thoughts about the creative life. You can sign up in the link below or at liminacreative.com/letters. And of course, I will be right here again next Saturday on the threshold if you would like to come on back. I would love to have you. Until then, stay passionately curious.